I want to first declare I want to dedicate this talk, as good as it's going to be, with apologies to the two people that it's dedicated to. One of them is to my father, his seventh yahrzeit, which was a few weeks ago. Seventh, Rav Avram ben Rav David and Sarah. And also my very good friend's first yahrzeit, Ben Meir, some of you would remember, Binyamin Aharon ben Yosef Cohen. You probably do remember him. He used to come here. He was like a brother to me, and he passed away 1 year ago, about 2 weeks ago. So his first yahrzeit has just passed.
Pictures on our wall.
Yeah, sure.
Next to Yehuda.
I want to, first of all, I want to thank everyone who has come. I understand it's beginning to freeze up a little bit on the ground, so be very, very careful walking out the driveway afterwards.
We
cleaned everything out, and it's being salted again, so hopefully we'll be safe.
We'll check
be
it.
Careful. Okay. I chose a topic that is a little bit enigmatic and maybe a bit foreboding. The title is Darkness, and it's peculiar, but it all began in my mind when I was studying Makat Choshech, the plague of darkness in MITZRAYIM, just a few weeks ago, as we were going through that topic. Let's start with just a simple text. God said to Moshe, "Stretch out your hand over the heavens, and let there be darkness, v'yihi choshech, over the land of Egypt, and they will feel the darkness, v'yamesh choshech." Moshe stretches out his hand towards the heavens, and there was gloomy darkness, choshech afela. The psukim, one after the other, mention these three expressions of darkness throughout the land of Egypt for 3 days. V'hi choshech, v'yamesh choshech, v'hi choshech afela. Right? V'haya choshech afela. And the Bachya, one of the Mefarshim in the Chumash, says something very peculiar. He says, there are three expressions of darkness here because the Torah is trying to tell us that there are three famous choshechs, three famous darknesses, mentioned 3 times here to remind us that there are three. Which are the three that he points out? He says one of them is here in Makat Choshech, the plague of darkness. The other one is with Avram, who's not yet Abraham, at the Brit Ben Abtarim. We will get to that. There was great darkness that night. And Moshe Rabbeinu, at the time of the Matan Torah, it says that he goes up into the darkness, Rafel, Asher Shama Elokim. Darkness, darkness, and darkness, 3 different darknesses. It seems like a very peculiar, startling Bachya that would have these three juxtaposed in a grouping of darkness experiences that are so bizarrely different, right? There's the MITZRAYIM going through darkness, Avram in the future of Tarim, and Moshe reaching out and entering into the place where God is, so to speak, yes, at the top of Har Sinai. What could possibly bring those three to mind in some kind of group? So I gave it some thought, and I think that the Bachya is trying to point us towards an analysis of human experiences of darkness, as startlingly different as they are. I want to just go back to the first one, let's say. Okay, we talk about this MITZRAYIM going through this darkness experience. And there are a couple of other special features about this one. It says, a man could not see his brother, right? Lo ra'a ish et achiv, the experience of the Egyptians. And a man could not arise from his spot for 3 days. Lo kam ish mitachtav shloshet yamim, right? They didn't even move from their spot. But for all the children of Israel, there was light in their settlements. The Jews saw light. Now, it's a little peculiar kind of darkness, no? First of all, darkness is actually not a thing, not a substance. It's simply the absence of light. In the dark, a man can light a candle and see plenty. A bit of light can disperse much darkness. However, this darkness was different. It had substance. Remember, we said vayamesh choshech. It had substance. It could be felt, palpable darkness, which blocked their eyes. A candle didn't help them. They could not see. However, we're told that the Jews had light wherever they went, including an Egyptian's house. They walked into an Egyptian's house, they saw. So what kind of darkness is that could be felt, that Egyptians could not see no matter how much light they put, but there's plenty of light around them, and the Jews can see light. So it cannot be, by the way, that they were struck blind, because if we're talking about blindness, the Torah has an expression for blindness that already took place before Makat Choshech, and you remember? Sanverim, right? Sanverim, we have a word for blindness. And you remember in Lot story where the people who wanted to attack the door of Lot after they wanted to get their hands on the three whom he had taken in as guests, and it says right? So if we wanted to talk about blindness, we could have said the Egyptians were struck blind. What's this choshech? So clearly that's not the case. So the Midrash describes this plague as the covering of the Egyptians' eyes with a substance, with an actual cover, and it was a coin, a dinar. There was light all around them, which could be seen by anybody else, for the Jews. They had eyes but could not see, right? That would explain the phrase they could feel, vayamash choshech, because they could put their finger on their eyes. They couldn't remove this thing, but they could actually feel the thing that was blocking their eyes, so blindfolded, right? And there's significance in the Midrash choosing the blindfold to be a coin. They say it's a dinar. A dinar of gold, said to be the thinnest of the coins of the day. And I think psychologically and ideologically, it seems to say that if they had their eyes on the dollar always before their eyes, then it obscured their perception of all other values, of justice, fairness, compassion, true friendship. They were blind to those. Thus, we could understand lo ra'u ish et achiv, right? Because they couldn't see each other. A society that hoarded all the riches of the world, remember what MITZRAYIM was, which conquered all others and even enslaved many nations under their power, could not create a culture of loyalty, friendship, and brotherhood even among themselves. Eventually, even those brothers in power will be torn asunder in discord. Just think about Rome and all the stories about Caesar and all the great powers and riches and powerful of the world over. Finally, just tears itself apart. But why? So we know something about this blindness, and we know something about this covering on their eyes, and they didn't see each other as brothers. But why lo kam ish mitachtav shloshet yamim? That's a little peculiar. Even a blind person who cannot see at all, right, gets up. You've seen blind people. They feel their way. They use a stick. So if you're struck, if you can't see right now and you have no training about getting about, so you certainly can get off your chair and touch the walls and make yourself crawl and find what you need. As a matter of fact, the Midrash says so great was this inability to move that they began to starve for the 3 days and couldn't get to water, couldn't get to food. And it so happens, an amazing Midrash, that the Jews themselves who could see were afraid to let these people die, so they brought them food and water. The Jews fed the MITZRAYIM, which the Midrash describes is one of the reasons that they had such great love for the Jews later on and were ready to give them anything they wished because of the way they took care of them during Choshech, right after the next plague of Makat B'chorot, right? So why couldn't they get up? So I want to think about this in psychological terms because the Midrash says something fantastic. It explains that God had sent a multitude of terrifying demons and bad angels to frighten them in the dark, freezing them in their place. And we read it in the Haggadah, by the way. I never thought about it that's connected to this. Vayishlach bam charona po evra v'za'am v'tzara mishlachat malachim ra'im. One of the Farshim said mishlachat malachim ra'im were these great, amazing, evil, terrible angels, demons that were sent dafka now. Okay, they flew among the Egyptians, screaming in their faces, shouting threatening screeches in their ears, and the Egyptians were frozen in fear and couldn't budge. Not because of the darkness, but because of this terror of the night. And I'd like to interpret this in emotional terms. Theirs was an evil empire. They were willing accomplices of Paro's early plot to oppress the Jews. We know that because remember, Paro didn't seem able, like many tyrants, to be sure that he can start the campaign against the Jews all by himself, he says, Havani Tchakmalo. He's talking to them as, you're my comrades. I mean, let's do this together. He needed every tyrant. Hitler also needed the people to acquiesce. And they were willing accomplices to Pharaoh's plot. Later, many of them served as taskmasters, carrying whips, mercilessly driving their victims to exhaustion. Many threw Jewish children into the Nile, drowning them. Newborn babies were sometimes stuffed into the mortar to make up for insufficient bricks for construction. And even the mostly passive Egyptians looked on with apathy, uncaring, when seeing so much suffering inflicted by their own countrymen. They all shared, therefore, in the guilt of the terrible injustice. When all was well, before the plagues and before Moshe came, they could delude themselves that they wouldn't be held accountable ever. There would be no judge and no judgment. Now the time had come. Their security was beginning to crack. The first 8 plagues shook their confidence. They could hear the slow approaching steps of their judge and the whispering of their accusers preparing to bring them down. During their busy days, they could delude themselves and drown out those ominous sounds. The nights were sometimes worse. They would have nightmares occasionally of guilty men, but those nights were mercifully short, and the morning would come with the sun shining, and they could delude themselves once more to be soothing distractions. Suddenly, a terrible darkness of Makat Choshech descended upon them. It was a personal darkness, therefore, for each Egyptian. He was now a prisoner in his own blackness. Even while surrounded by light, he could not see a way out. He had created his own darkness in his soul, and now he had to face it. Finally, each man was compelled to confront his own terrible guilt and the blood on his conscience and the cruelty of his deeds. His guilt became the demon, screaming punishment that filled him with paralyzing terror. Darkness allows a guilty man to hear the accusing voice of his own conscience. If you remember, a very famous literary example of this, Hamlet. You probably have a good literary, there may be many examples, but Hamlet came to mind exactly right away. If you remember Polonius, the king who had killed Claudius, who had killed Hamlet's father and poisoned him, if you remember. So Hamlet concocts a play that's going to be played in front of him, and in the dark, Claudius sees reenacted his own, a story of his own crime. And he couldn't stand it. He panics and he says, "Give me some light." He wants light because the darkness allows him to be confronting that which he remembers, and he cannot stand to see it in the dark, so to speak. Yes? The moral darkness of their lives finally caused them to fall. We say this every Tuesday in Shir Shal Yom. Ad matai tishpetu avel ufnei risha'im tis'u sela lo yadu v'lo yavinu v'chashecha yitalachu. Right? I had said that you are the gods and you are the powerful ones, but now finally your day is coming. I had shouted to you, till when will you do injustice? But you walked in the dark, and finally your time has come. So this darkness, one experience of darkness. Now we go to a second one. What the Bachya points out is alata. Alata is one of the words for darkness that's mentioned in the Brit Ben Avtarim. And let's think about this experience. At the covenant between the pieces, right? The Brit Ben Avtarim. God's entire conversation takes place at night. If you remember, he starts by saying, "Come out into the outdoors, look up at the stars. Can you count them? That's how many your children will be." That's the introduction to this experience. It's at night. And Abraham says, "How will I know? The stars are very far away." Then he says, "And you're also going to inherit this land. And with what will I know that I'll inherit it?" He asks him. And then God tells him, "Okay, we're going to do the following thing. I want you to take a calf and a she-goat and a ram and a dove and a fledgling." And he was to divide their bodies in half and arrange them in 2 rows with a path between. Vultures swooped down to devour the carcasses, but Abraham that night had to continue to chase them away. At various times in this event, Avram experiences darkness and fear. And ותרדמה נפלה על אברהם, והנה אימה חשיכה גדולה נופלת עליו, עלתה היה, והנה תנור עשן ולפיד אש אשר עבר בין הגזרים. Repeatedly, the frightening experience of darkness is surrounding him that night. And then it even says that the sun was coming in. Hashemesh ba'a. I mean, it's a strange enigma in the middle of the night to say, and the sun is coming. One of the Mefarshim says that it points out the fact that the night was a very long night, and the sun was coming, but it's not yet visible. And you know, the pre-dawn darkness, some people say, is like the greatest darkness. Psychologically, it certainly is true. You say, when is this night going to be over? You're tolerating the night, and the sun is coming, but I can't see it. When will it come? Right? Interpreting for himself the symbolism of the different animals of the covenant, Abraham has a premonition of 4 great painful exiles in the image of these animals that we're talking about that would befall his descendants. These caused him increasing distress. First, dread, Ema. The Medrash says that was at the vision of the Babylonian exile. Then darkness, Chashecha, at the premonition of the Persian oppression. Then a greater darkness, Chashecha Gdola, at the conquest of the Greeks under Antiochus. And he's just getting these premonitions of all these terrible things that will happen. And then Chashecha Gdola Nofelat Alav, a horrible darkness falls upon him like an immense weight. And he is made to slumber when he had a vision of the long exile from Edom, from Rome, which was to be the worst and the longest of all. A great deep slumber fell upon him, and a great dark terror, Eima Chashecha, falling upon him. Then, after all of that, God declares to him a new decree. He said, I want you to know that your children will be in Egypt as an exile, and they will be oppressed, and they will be tortured, and they will be enslaved for 400 years. In fact, it also says again, and the sun was coming in, just to emphasize that terrible last part of the night. And suddenly, there's a new word, alata, a night blackness, and a smoking oven and a fiery torch that passed between these pieces of the animals. What an incredible night. Just think about it. First, there's a promise to a childless old man, count the stars. That's the way your children will be. And the stars are so far away and so abstract, hard to grasp it. Then a promise of the land. How will I even know that I can possibly inherit this land where I'm just an alien and I don't have a foot to put on? Right? When I wanted to bury my wife, I couldn't even do it later on, right? Then instructions to take the animals and cleave them into a path or a gauntlet, symbolizing many troubled times for his people ahead. And then vultures come and try to devour them, and he has to put them aside. And people say that these vultures are a symbol of the great enemies that would stop the Jewish people and his descendants from serving God. Here he is trying to do what God wanted him to do, and the vultures are going to eat him, and he has to swipe them away. And they're going to interfere with their avodas Hashem, and it's going to be very hard to disperse them. And then, at the end of all that, as though it's not enough, Hashem tells him his children will be tormented and enslaved in a land for 400 years. Oh, God. And then on top of that, a smoke-filled oven passes between the pieces. All is darkness. Worse than darkness, smoke. Blocking your vision. A black night, and now the smoke blinds his vision. He can't even see the path between the pieces anymore. How will we pass through these pieces, these exiles, and emerge to the other side to redemption? Where is the path? How will we ever pass through all that black misery when the blinding darkness and thick smoke confounds us so? But wait, all of a sudden, he says, there in the dark, thick smoke of this oven, he can make out a fiery torch. Vaguely, there's a torch. Remember, lapid esh is in the middle of it. Is it possible that there's some light? There it is again, and it's moving. The lapid esh asher avar bein hagzarim. It's moving down the path. It's pointing forward, slowly but surely within the smoke, between the carcasses and the darkness, down the long path towards the end. The torch fire was faint when seen through the smoke, but it moved forward irrevocably. If it could shine even so faintly now through the smoke, you can tell that when it gets to the other end, there will be a great light. Avram woke up from the night. Many people say he woke up. This was an image. The whole experience was a vision, and he wakes up. And he remembers the horrible night of the darkness, but he also recalls the torch at the end moving forward within the smoke. He now knows that he will teach his children not to be paralyzed by the terror of the dark nights of their history. Lo tira mipachad laila. We, his descendants, will always remember to see that there is a light leading us to the end of the tunnel, the torch of God's promise. Justice will be done, and the final generation will return here. Our forefather Avram was given a vision of the torch, the lapidesh. He discovered the strength to endure and the hope to find the path leading to the fulfillment of God's promise of ultimate redemption. The guilty, evil Egyptians caused their own dark night. Thus, they were immobilized by fear and hopelessness and finally enveloped in confusion. Abraham and his children, the people of great destiny, will not be paralyzed by the dark nights. Their night was not of their own making. They can shrug it off because they know that there is always a light of hope, even when it's almost totally hidden in the smoke of pain and confusion. That hope will energize them and help them endure and move on towards their final goal. I suddenly came upon an interesting analogy to this experience we just now had about Brit Ben Avtarim. I didn't see it written anywhere. When we observe the splitting of the sea, Kriyat Yam Suf, we notice another splitting, cleaving of a dreadful deep sea, creating a path to pass through it. Walking in the deep sea floor surrounded by towering, ominous cliffs of water was terrifying for everybody, including the Jewish people. You remember, God insisted, go forward, Daber of Israel v'yisau. The Egyptians, possessed by hatred, plunged forward. The pillar of cloud that was in front of the Jewish people moves behind them to block the view and the access of the Egyptians to the Jews. And the pillar of fire that would shine the light for the Jews to move forward also went behind them and joined the cloud of the pillar of cloud, and you had them merge into one, light forward for the Jews to move forward, black cloud blocking the Egyptians from coming forward. And all through the night, that's the way it was. The Egyptians see darkness, while the Jews see light. Finally, the lesson Avram learned in the covenant between the pieces, Brit Ben Avtarim, became reality for his children at this time. The darkness and the blinding cloud of their night was over for the Jewish people. Their evil oppressors, first stricken by the plague of darkness, now inherited the blinding cloud in the sea, with no fiery torch for them to see. V'gam et hagoy asher ya'avodu dan anochi. I will judge the nation that will enslave them. The bright future of the Jewish people was now illuminated by the light of Avram's torch, this pillar of fire, burning bright, with no dark cloud left to be seen. The Jewish people's secret perception of the fiery torch of hope, even when it is almost totally hidden within the thick, dark cloud of suffering, has assured our survival through many tragic times of suffering. I'm reminded of Yeshayahu. I was reminded of Yeshayahu, I should say, by Avram Becker, my chavruta, who always teaches me great things. It says, Ha'am ha'holchim b'choshech, ra'u or gadol, yoshvei ve'eretz tal mavet, or noga aleihem. Loosely translated, the people walking in darkness have seen a great light. They that dwell in the land of the shadow of death, upon them light does shine. I want to point out, this sentence is profound, not just that you go from darkness to light, but listen to the tense, the grammatical tense. Ha-holchim b'choshech, ra'u or gadol. Those who are walking in darkness have seen a great light, while in the darkness, right? Yoshvei be'eretz salmavet, those who are in the valley of the shadow of death, upon them light does shine. The perception of the torch within the darkness, right? Last month, this brings to mind that my father's yahrzeit has just passed. And our Abba always kept this torch before him. I know many conversations who taught me that he took after his namesake, Abraham, my father Abraham. I'm reminded especially of my father's letter that he wrote to two younger brothers who were imprisoned by the British in Cyprus. When they dared to come to the land of their fathers after barely surviving years of starvation and slave labor in Nazi concentration camps for years. It's heartbreaking to realize that they had not yet reunited and seen each other since they separated in 1939. And this letter is written in 1948, Purim, Arab Purim. And he sent it with a simple package of a little bit, couple of cookies and food that my mother had prepared as shalach manos.
From Israel.
Yeah, they were of course in Israel, yes. And they're in Cyprus, the two brothers in Cyprus, Tzvi and Aryeh, younger than he. As Mishloach Manot. And he writes in the letter, I'm hoping this is going to get through. There's all kinds of problems of the aid program that is supposed to make contact. And my father described to them, because they don't know what's going on in Israel, the atrocities of the Arab marauders against the fledgling Jewish community, which wished only to live in peace and rebuild the land. He lambasted also the collaboration of the British occupation forces, which enabled the Arabs to do their murderous work while blocking all efforts of Jewish self-defense. And here's a quote from the letter, written in Hebrew, of course. The British also have revealed their capacity for violence, hatred, and even treacherous killing of Jews. They have all revealed their true evil face to the entire world. They threaten us at all fronts, but their schemes will not endure. The Jewish people has known many enemies and has seen them all collapse. The Haman of our generation will meet the same end as did Haman in the time of Mordecai and Esther, and we, with God's help, will merit salvation and redemption. Talk about seeing the torch. So, two different experiences of darkness so far we've done. Avram and the Jewish people and MITZRAYIM, a guilty party and a people of destiny. One more, the Bachya points out, has to do with Moshe going up to Hashem in Har Sinai and into the Arafel, into this pitch blackness in which God is. Asher Shama Elokim. Strange and profound sentence. Now, of course, God's revelation on Mount Sinai, many things took place. The people saw dramatic fire and smoke and sounds and recoiled in awe, right? They recoil back in their fear. And Moshe, Nigash El Ha'arafel Asher Shama Elokim. There were many remarkable physical manifestations of God's descent on the mountain to meet with his people. The mountain shuddered and shook, a great fire burned with a great smoke, and great sound of the shofar was heard, getting louder and louder, and everybody trembled. However, that was not where God was. Moshe was supposed to enter the deep, dark, secret fog, Arafel, to commune with God. This reminds you something of Tanakh. Some of my father's students probably perk up immediately, and I won't put them on notice. But if you remember Eliyahu Hanavi, right? Eliyahu, you have a chance to be included in this talk. Yeah? Eliyahu Hanavi, when he ran away from oppression by Jezebel, runs away, and he finally comes to Har Horeb, to this mountain, and it's at night. He comes up, and there's a great hurricane breaking mountains of wind, and then there is there's a startling noise, and then there's a fire raging, but God was not in any of these. And then there was, in the night, a sound of silence. In the darkness, nothing was to be seen, and in the silence was God. Vayihi ki shmoa Eliyahu, strange remark, there's silence. Vayihi ki shmoa Eliyahu, and Eliyahu heard before he's spoken to, he heard. So everybody asks, what's he hearing in this non-sound place? What can be heard? How is it that to Moshe, in the invisible dark is where God is, and to Eliyahu, in the unheard sound is where he communes with God, right? Now, we'll leave that for just a second, and there's another paradox I want to suggest. We're commanded to tie tzitziot on four-cornered gadim, right, talit. And one of those cords is supposed to be something called techelet, right? And most people describe the techelet as something of a certain shade of blue. And the Gemara suggests there's a reason for this, because blue, a person sees blue and he free associates. And if he concentrates a little bit and lets himself go, he'll think of the sea, which is blue, and then he'll think of the sky, which is blue, and then he'll soar a bit higher and he'll see the stone of sapphire of sorts under God's throne, and he'll connect to the Kadosh Baruch Hu. That's supposed to be one of these free association things in the ritual that we do with the Talit. Now, peculiarly, the Rambam, looking at the word Tchelet, he says, it's not blue, it's black. The Rambam describes it in the Chumash, Pirush on Chumash and elsewhere, that it's black. How could black help us to free associate and have our imagination perceive God? Black is a non-color. It has no wavelengths, no light. Am I right about that, artist? How can we gaze at black and behold God? In order to grope for an understanding of these paradoxes that I've just mentioned, three of them, I want to read a letter to you. Now, I'm a little embarrassed reading this letter. It brings up, first of all, a memory of Ben Mayer, with whom, and his wife, my wife, Judy Kims, and two other couples, we went on a trip to various places, including the Grand Canyon. And we were on the north rim of the Grand Canyon, very beautiful place. And it was the first time I've seen the place. And I want to read a letter to you that it so happens I wrote. And I feel humbled by a gift that I was given of a certain experience. And I just have to read what I wrote because it's hard to describe.
Who did you write it to? Who did you write it to?
I wrote it to myself
Oh.
to describe what I had experienced as soon as I could when we got back. In the late afternoon, we had finally reached the north rim of the Grand Canyon. We stood on the edge of a large boulder jutting out over the precipice below. We beheld an overwhelming panorama of cliffs, mesas and spires, chiseled valleys and crevasses, and the great river far below, all bathed in light of many colors: fiery red, golden, yellow, violet, pink, green, orange, and blue, interrupted here and there by hard black shadows of day. I was stunned. The rest of us were stunned. I stood there, mouth agape in wonder, and after a long interval of silent awe, I exclaimed, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam oseh maaseh breshit. Blessed are you, God our Lord, King of the universe, who did the deeds of creation. The canyon views were an overwhelming reminder of the Creator and his wondrous works. Now, we went to sleep that night, and in the morning, before anybody else got up, an inner unconscious alarm clock woke me up while it was still dark. And gathering my talit and tefillin, I intended to go down to the edge and to daven there, shachrit. I made my way to the canyon's edge, pitch black, no moonlight. I cautiously climbed onto the same large boulder because Judy wasn't there. And like a blind man on my hands and knees, I inched my way forward till my fingers felt the edge of the stone. And I stood up. I was all alone. The air was still, no breeze brushed against my skin. All was quiet. No bird chirped, no animal called to break the silence. The night was black, nothing to be seen. Towards the east, there was a thin, dark, charcoal gray line suggesting the horizon. At first, recalling the scene which lay invisible before me, I tried to conjure in my mind the pleasure of seeing those things, the contours and the colors that I saw. But then, in the dark silence, I became aware of a mysterious presence having nothing to do with the shapes below. It filled the space below me, covered the invisible canyon structures, rose up to hover before my face, and then enveloped me and extended upwards to the invisible, boundless sky above. This presence was dynamic, actively floating over the earth and within the space below and around me. It was both powerful and gentle, enveloping all in its dark embrace. I became aware that I was floating within the divine presence. Without a conscious effort, I stood with my mouth and eyes open, unaware of my own breathing, my hands open, and my arms relaxed at my sides. I was weightless. I felt a silent, deep communication. It was not made up of specific messages, but I apprehended an awesome power and paternal love flowing deep into my mind and my heart. I don't know how long I stood there. Time stopped. It couldn't have been very long because the dawn was approaching. Slowly, the gray line on the eastern horizon brightened a bit to a paler gray, and my eyes could barely make out vague hints of the shapes below me, bathed in the dark blue mist. As I became gradually aware of the physical reality of the canyon's contours, my sensation of the presence began to blur. With every slight change in the light coming from the east, in ever-changes mixtures of colors, there was an increasing definition and color to the canyon forms. Simultaneously, however, the presence that I felt seemed to melt away. The beauty of the canyon shapes in an emerging rainbow of colors was wondrous. However, at the same time, I felt a pang of sadness because the more I could see, the less I could feel the presence. I closed my eyes, and for a moment, I tried to recapture the dark stillness in which the presence could be felt. The irony of this was startling to me. The same views of the canyon yesterday afternoon were an inspiring witness of God's creative powers and moved me to bless him as the master of the universe. Then in the dark of the pre-dawn, when the canyon was invisible, God's presence was palpable. And then the reappearance of the same majestic canyon served paradoxically to hide him from me. With the emerging dawn, I hastened to prepare myself for davening. I didn't want to miss Nate's, hoping to reconnect. So first, in preparation for the tefillah, was to take the talit. I unfolded it and was ready to wrap myself in it, and I recited the famous tefillah that we all do every morning before putting it on. I said, Barchi nafshi et Hashem, Ote or kasalma, note shamayim kayuriya. God, you don light like a garment, and spreading out the heavens like a curtain. All of a sudden, those words, for the first time, I was listening to my own words. And it struck me that this was paradoxical. We normally think of light as serving to reveal something or someone, not to hide. Yet, these words described God as wearing a light like a garment. A garment may subtly suggest the shape of a person wearing it. However, the true shape and texture and color of the wearer's body remains hidden. How strange to describe God's light as God's cloak. And similarly, the bright heavens illuminate the world below and help us to see God's wonders. And yet the words of the prayer is, you, God, spread out the heavens like a curtain. Contradicts this function. A curtain always suggests a veil covering something behind it from our gaze. How strange to call the heavens God's curtain. And standing in the dawn of that day, with the increasingly visible canyon, I suddenly understood the meaning of this paradox. The beauty and wonders of the natural world are indeed witnesses of God's greatness and bountiful kindness. The awesome sun and stars speak of his power. The vastness of the galaxies and deep space of the universe speaks of his mystery. The beauty and variety of the Earth's life forms speak of his artistry, and the intricate molecular structures of our hormones and enzymes speak of his kindness and bounty. However, they're only a suggestion of his presence in the universe. He is not the universe. He remains mysterious. The light of day reveals nature. In relation to God, it's like a garment which can only hint at the forms of its wearer. A man is not what he wears. The person himself remains hidden from us. Similarly, though visible nature can suggest the presence of God, it also serves to hide him from our perception. A curtain may indeed suggest the form of the person standing behind it, but he's not seen clearly. Just so, the heavens do help us to discern hints of God's presence, but they also form a tapestry behind which God remains hidden in the dark, so to speak. Maimonides' talit, the black tchelet, strings, help us to leave all physical senses behind and connect with the invisible Holy One. After all, water of the sea and space really has no color. Gazing into their depths, one perceives only darkness. If you go out into outer space and you look sideways, not at the sun directly, you will see black. You won't see blue. And if you scuba dive and you start going down into the water, you see the dark Tehom, which is black, not blue. This is enhanced by the practice of wearing the talit and surrounding our heads entirely for a moment, blocking all perception of light. Wrapping myself entirely in the talit, at that moment, I entered the world of mysterious darkness once again, and for a moment, enveloped in God's gentle, dark embrace, just as I had been before dawn's distracting light. The history of the Grand Canyon and the Talit suggests an understanding of this paradox. Moshe entering the darkness where God is, and Eliyahu hearing the sound of darkness in the night, the sound of silence in the night, on the same mountain. Moshe, you remember, was not the first time in Har Chorev. He came there once upon a time before going to MITZRAYIM, and he saw a burning bush that wasn't consumed, and God speaks to him from this fire. This time God says to him, no, that's not going to be the same. You're going to walk into the darkness where you have completely left all your senses behind, where I am going to communicate with you. I want you to come back close to me. Now, if I was to be invited, and I'm sure if Moshe was invited this way, it's a dreadful thought. You're being invited to leave everything about yourself as a human being. It's like being invited to die. Right? And Moshe has to overcome this natural human resistance because God is beckoning, and he goes into the Arafel where God is. Here in the dark, you will encounter me. I imagine that any man would hear this with fear, but Moshe overcomes this, and hu nigash el arafel asher shama Elohim. Sometimes, like when we are enveloped in the Talit's dark embrace, in the silent darkness, without distractions of the physical world, we may also feel God's presence for a moment, which constantly envelops and embraces all of existence. I want to mention that some people in this life, even while they gaze at natural scenes, with their eyes open, can view the divine in the empty spaces between the molecules. This is embarrassing again, right? But my Judicums and I took a wonderful hike in the blizzard of how many years ago now? There was a huge blizzard in this neighborhood, and there was a call out, nobody should get in the car and go anywhere. But right after davening, I saw that this was a beautiful experience to be had. So Judy and I took this car, we were probably the only ones on the road, and trudged our way to Harriman State Park. We took a camera with us. We couldn't really drive, so we had to stop and walk, take pictures, get back to the car, go another 100 yards, stop and walk again, take pictures. It's a wonderful experience. And our photos were assembled in a book by Judy, and it's in this room over there. You probably get to see it. I enjoyed the book because it brought back the memories of the scenes evoked by the photos, so I could experience them again. However, Judy decided to write a cover page to this book, dedicating the book. And here's what it says. I sought you in the perfect snowflakes descending silently, but you were in the deep, dark spaces between them, creating them for me. To have a vision of God, most of us need to leave all physical sight and light for a time. To hear God's voice, we must be deaf to all physical sound for a moment. Maybe if we can train the inner non-physical perceptions of our neshama, we could occasionally close our eyes and ears in the midst of a busy day, and entering that special darkness, discover that in reality we are constantly in the mysterious presence of the Holy One. We've talked about three experiences of darkness of very, very differing kinds. And I want to suggest that we should pray that we may never experience the darkness of greed and guilt, which brings paralysis and blocks our human interactions, as the Egyptians did. May we always find the light of hope in moments of great darkness and tragedy in our lives. And may we merit to experience the closeness of God in the dark mystery beyond our senses. Avram, you have a comment? I'm sure. How do I do this? I just press the, I can't do anything. That's it. Me take on. You know, that's a, I think it's a Melbourne or something, or it's a Ketava Kabbalah from the field, because of the field. Me take on. And he quotes Mishlachat Malachei Ma'im, Ketava Kabbalah. And that's a very original blend of the word. When he quoted it, it's the Ketava Kabbalah. There's a good question being asked. And in fact, I asked the question too. Of course, she's my father's student, so she would ask a wonderful question. She asks, you know, the Bachya says there are three choshechs, but there's another famous choshech. What's the most famous choshech we have? The first one, choshech al pnei tehom. There was darkness in the world before Breshit, right? So why would the Bachya bring? I mean, give the answer. Why would the Bachya quote these three choshechs and not that one? Yeah, these are three profound human experiences of darkness. And what do you do with that darkness, right? The darkness before the world was created is the darkness of emptiness, of great promise. You could say, you know, it's Hashem's darkness, so to speak, right? There was no human to experience that darkness. I thought about that also. Well, the first question we asked as soon as we were talking about this idea, I think he's focusing Dafka on human experiences of darkness, and there are very few otherwise suggested. There is Moshe and there is Eliyahu, which he doesn't quite. I think he's talking about Chamisha Chamshei Torah.